thank you for joining us for one of the second last panel of the day, Pulling Governments into the Digital Age. I'm Adrienne Batcher. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Toronto Sun. I have three esteemed panelists with me, but before I introduce them, I would like to take this opportunity to thank our incredible sponsors. Intuit is the sponsor of this particular panel. We have the Canadian Real Estate Association, TELUS, the Canadian Medical Association, Sun Life Financial, and Enbridge, who have helped sponsor many panels and discussions throughout our conference here at the Manning Centre. So we are very grateful and appreciative to all of our sponsors. Just do a couple of housekeeping items before the panelists are introduced. There is the Attendify app, and you've probably heard a lot of other moderators lecturing you about this, so please make sure you download the app if you want to pose questions to the panelists. Find my name, find this panel name, and send me a direct message, and I will endeavor to pose the question to the panelists. Let me begin by introducing Shannon Kellogg, who's the Vice President of Public Policy at Amazon in DC, and he leads the company's public policy efforts in support of Amazon's web services in the Americas. Andre Leduc is the Vice President of Government Relations and Policy for the Information Technology Association of Canada, right here in Ottawa. And last and certainly not least, the Honourable Peter Bethlen-Falvey is the MPP for Pickering Oxbridge, and is the President of the Treasury Board of Ontario. I'm going to hand it over to Shannon, who has kindly agreed to start us off, so please.
Great, well thank you very much, and thanks for the invitation to be here today. Really pleased to be here on a Saturday afternoon in lovely Ottawa. So I know that many of you probably think of Amazon in the context of our well-known consumer services. And you're probably very familiar with our e-commerce platform, as well as all the things we're doing in content and devices these days with that consumer business. And it's our oldest and largest business at Amazon. And the second business, though, that you might be less aware of is Amazon Web Services, or AWS, which is the cloud computing division of Amazon. And that's the one that I work and my group works with the most in our roles at Amazon. It's actually a business that's only been around for 13 years and was started in 2006. And during that period, we went from zero to now at about a $30 billion US run rate for that business. And it's the fastest growing business at Amazon, and we're proud to be a part of this revolution around cloud computing. What is cloud computing? For those of you who may not focus as much on it, it's like having access to IT, by using something like that light switch in the back of the room. You're basically turning on and off your ability to access IT resources, within seconds via the internet. And essentially, where in the old days you had to spend a lot of time, 6 to 9 months, building out your access to supercomputing resources. Literally, if you're in government or a company or a startup, you can have access to massive computing resources within seconds by just putting your credit card in and accessing that via AWS. And so this type of model has really helped transform how IT is done, both within the commercial and public sector. In terms of the conversation today around IT modernization, we believe very much in IT modernization and supporting IT modernization, which in its foundation does mean migration to commercial cloud computing services. We're seeing this trend worldwide by governments at every level of government, whether it's local or provincial or even national. I cover the Americas, so I spend time here in Canada, I spend time in the US at the state and federal level, and I spend time across Latin America. And just over the last year, we're seeing a number of governments, for example, in Latin America, establish cloud-first strategies as part of their IT modernization efforts, with Argentina and Chile being two of the most recent. We're seeing states across the U.S. One of the more recent ones that's gone all in cloud, commercial cloud as part of their IT modernization strategy is the Commonwealth of Virginia, where they issued, the governor there issued an executive order to establish a cloud-first policy, and then also the legislature worked with him to put language in the budget to establish milestones and how agencies in the state were moving to commercial cloud and put timelines around that, as well as some of the funding requirements. And so there are governments everywhere that are really moving fast. Here in Canada is no different. We're seeing a lot of activity at the provincial level. I know we have the minister from Ontario who will talk about some of their IT modernization efforts. We're seeing it across Canada. We're seeing a push here at the federal government level as well. And we've been a part of those conversations now for a number of years, both at the federal and provincial level. I actually had the privilege of being involved very early in both Amazon and AWS's expansion here in Canada. And we have an AWS data center infrastructure here, region here, basically means a cluster of data centers in a physical place. In this case, it's in the Montreal area, where we now have this data center infrastructure region on Canadian soil, and we announced that in 2016. And we have 20 of those, by the way, physically, internationally around the world, where we have these clusters of data centers. And we put the one here in Canada before we established one in France or UK and some countries like that. And so we're really bullish about the opportunities to work with both the public sector as well, of course, commercial organizations in their IT modernization efforts here in Canada. I'm not going to go through all these slides, but I think I share these because these are very compelling quotes about how national security agencies are moving to commercial cloud. And one of the milestone efforts that we got involved in 2013 was the transition as part of their as part of the intelligence community's IT modernization strategy in the U.S. They decided to build a commercial cloud region, and we were ultimately selected to do that. And they've gone all in on commercial cloud with high side information, which means top secret information. And it's been very successful, and you can see some of the national security quotes in support of that. Before I wrap up, there are basically 3 or 4 things that we're seeing that governments are grappling with as they consider their IT modernization strategies. One are, because of the shift in model here, and I talked about how organizations are moving to this utility-based model where you can just pay for what you actually use when you use it. Basically, it's creating some cultural challenges. You know, there are a lot of agencies and workers in those agencies who haven't necessarily historically leveraged commercial cloud services as much as they have the old sort of on-premise model of the past. And so there's a lot of cultural change that is occurring where people are moving away from hugging their boxes, you know, hugging that device in data centers, and actually leveraging commercial cloud providers to go off premise. There's also a shift in how budgets are done. And I know many of you are probably already familiar with that, but moving from capital infrastructure, or capital expenditure, Andre corrected me there because I know he's going to talk a little bit about that too, to operational expenditure. And basically you're moving away from this idea that as an agency or as a government you have to spend all of your money by X date, and you're in fact moving to this operational expense model, which means you pay for what you actually use. And so I know we'll probably talk a little bit more about that panel. And then we're also seeing governments really trying to understand early how they can establish the right security frameworks to move rapidly to cloud and get the security benefits of cloud, which there are many, and we'll talk, I'm sure, a little bit more about those during the panel. So I'll stop there. I think I'm at my time, and back to you.
You did pretty good.
Thank you.
Do you want to hand over the clicker
I do.
to Andre?
That's right. I missed my assignment there.
Andre, you at ITAC have put forward this whole notion of commercial first, and I know that the audience is here quite anxious to hear all about that, so please take it away.
Well, thank you. So I'll build, it was a great segue, by the way, build a lot on what Shannon had to say around modernizing federal IT, but one of the biggest things that have occurred, first a little bit about the association. So we're about 340 companies, it's technology companies, telcos, multinationals, including over 200 SMEs. The sector is, for lack of a better descriptor, on fire. We're growing at between 5 and 8% annually. The job numbers are incessant in terms of the growth. Toronto is now outpacing the Silicon Valley in terms of hiring for technology-related jobs. So this sector in Canada is driving economic growth. And our governor of the Bank of Canada has recently stated this publicly. He said, like, I can't believe how quickly this industry is growing. And the reason why we end up at the concept of commercial first, and I'll get into it in a minute, is that government spending should be focused on engaging different industries within the private sector and supporting their growth. So that's where the real jobs and economic growth, that's where we're going to export our services and our products. So it's to move from a fundamental assertion that, you know, more bureaucracy is better to actually more spending in the private sector is actually better for economic growth. So that's one of the assertions. Another assertion is that current legislation and policy fails to address what has gone on in the private sector in terms of the shift. So Shannon talked about capital expenditure needing to shift to operational expenditure. Well, that shift is yet to occur in the system that we're accounting with in most bureaucracies in the federal government and a lot of provincial governments. It's a sea change that has to occur. It's not simple to understand that our industry used to sell you a product or a software or hardware, and now even when we're providing you hardware, it's more of a managed service. So whether it's hardware or software, we're doing network as a service, infrastructure as a service, platforms as a service, software as a service. Now we're even doing function as a service. And the reason is the private sector demand side wants to save money. They want the latest and greatest technology, so I need it as soon as is humanly possible. But I also want to do it in a fiscally responsible way. And we're driving down costs across the entirety of the private sector. It is unbelievable, some of the stories I hear from our members about I did a $1.2 million project with this entity. They were saving $200,000 a day for the first 3 weeks, and then after that they were saving over $500,000 a day. And I go, whoa, you just told me that somebody spent $1.2 million and that project paid for itself in 6 business days. And they're going, yeah, that's the types of cost savings that are available to this. The other thing I wanted to note was that the industry has gone through a significant transformation. Technology today is vastly dissimilar to what it was a few years ago. And you look at the examples, cloud, machine learning and artificial intelligence, the availability of remote workforce, right? The fact that the focus on the consumer, the user experience, the focus on the consumer and the consumers having that much power has never happened before. Businesses can die because consumers give them poor reviews. It's happening instantaneously. So there's been a massive shift in the way our industry does business, but it's also enabling sea changes in smart cities, in quantum computing, in robotics, and we're seeing the disruption occurring. And people get really concerned about the jobs that are this is going to impact jobs. This has always been happening, right? We went from stable boys to car mechanics. We went from the operator plugging into the router and the switch. This type of technology disruption, washing clothes by hands to having a washing machine. Same with a fridge from an icebox. We've been doing this for over 100 years. This is what technology does. The other thing that it's important to note that technology does is technology isn't the disruptor. When you hear of Uber really disrupting the taxi market, Uber disrupted, it's not unbelievable technology. It's a pretty simple application. But what they were attacking was an inefficient business model. And this is what technology is really focused on, is where are there inefficiencies? How can we drive efficiencies at those inefficiencies? So this sea change is occurring. Now, the current dilemma in a federal context is, for the most part, all governments, whether they're municipal, provincial, or federal in Canada, but even other governments around the world, they're struggling to keep pace with the amount of change that's going on with technology. The people that are the technologists within the public sector, whether they're municipal, provincial, or federal, often have outdated skill sets. If you're not training, and I mean constantly training on new technologies because the pace of innovation is unbelievable, you can't understand and know what the market can offer. So our industry association estimates that there are about 80,000 plus people doing IT-related support functions in the federal portfolio for 262,000 federal employees. That puts the ratio at about 1 to 3. That's one IT support worker for every 3 people. Now, if you take that number, and it's an estimate, we don't know for sure because we haven't really done an audit in this space, but it's probably, it's probably actually, it's probably in and around this. Now, at $600 a day, which is actually a fairly conservative number for an IT contractor, that equals about $12.5 billion a year to keep the lights on about 16,000 applications and about 560, almost up to 700, some say as low as 386 outdated data centers in the federal portfolio. It's a vast amount of what we call technology debt. I have made so many investments over so many years in technology, I need to expand its utility over time as much as I can, so I will keep the older technology functioning for as long as I can to try to drive out efficiency in it. But what we see with this is it's an inability to move this $12.5 billion and spend it on new tech. I'm spending $12.5 billion keeping the lights on older stuff. I'm not allowing that budget to be freed up to invest in new technologies. And this is why governments are struggling with modernizing and providing digital services to consumers. Now, digital services to consumers is a key concept because we all walk around with our phone. We almost never go to a bank anymore. It's unbelievable. Like, we just want to be able to pull this out, do it. It'd be great if I could apply for my passport, just pull up my phone, take a selfie, go through a form, and we're off and running. But the concept for government is that oftentimes this crew of 80,000 people thinks that they can build a product, good, or service as well as an AWS, for example. That they can match the type of service delivery that the commercial entities can. In this day and age, with outdated skill sets, and they don't have all of the tools available to them in the toolbox, all of the new tech, it's impossible for them to keep pace. So that's the concept here. It just says in-house built solutions for government come at an expense, being wholly borne by a taxpayer. And there's no secondary value creation. So imagine a scenario where the government seeks a solution and the bureaucracy says, we can build that. And the cost of building that is totally borne by the taxpayer, and there's no downstream economic benefit. Now, same solution, I go out to the private sector. The private sector builds that solution for me, it solves that problem. That private sector entity can take that solution that they just built for government and resell it. I can resell it to municipal governments, I can resell it to provincial governments, foreign state governments, foreign municipal governments. So the potential, if I have a cool, innovative solution for a government, I can sell these downstream. And that's the difference. That's why we're touting go commercial first. The concept here is to require the government, if they're building out an IT solution, to go with something that is commercially viable and available so that commercial entity can take that solution and resell it over and over again. You're driving economic growth using federal procurement to do so. It's based on legislation. So the Commercial First Act is based on legislation from the United States called the Freedom from Government Competition Act. It's currently in front of Congress. And essentially, this was brought to our attention by our own members and said, it would be really interesting if our government, while they're seeking modernization, would go with a commercial first approach, as is being proposed by Congress south of the border. I know I'm running out of time, but there's also a really important concept here. Canadians are some of the most apt technology consumers on the planet. When you look at this map, we are third behind South Korea at 94%, and Australia at 93% in terms of the percentage of Canadians who have both kind of high-speed internet access and a smartphone. So our government's inability to provide these digital services to the citizenry and the consumer is it's impeding our ability to interact with citizenry. I don't want to have to go to the passport office for 2 hours to apply for a passport anymore. Because when I deal with private sector entities, I get that service instantly. I turn on the phone, they're there. If I want to buy something, they're there. It's not taking me weeks and weeks to go through a process and a procedure to get what I want. So it's just migrating that pace, the pace of change. Now, one of the other big problems that we have, especially with the federal government and to a lesser degree with provincial governments, is they prescribe the solution to industry. And what I get from our industry all the time is, don't tell me what and how to build something. Tell me what the problem is and what outcome you're seeking, and I will innovate to solution for that. Right? The inability for them to be able to do this, when they come at industry and they've already got all the specs laid out and they've got all of the rules that you want to follow, and you were going to build to their specifications a custom solution, one, the costs are that much more, and two, the support for that product over time is that much more because it's custom, it's bespoke. Nobody else is using that particular solution, so you need technologists to support that solution over time. When they go about business like this here, it really stifles innovation. So the capacity for them to challenge industry and say, I have this problem, I would like this outcome, you are going to get really innovative solutions to the problems, and you're going to challenge academia, small business, and large business to come up with these solutions. In terms of cost savings, and I mentioned this earlier, it's difficult for them to free up current budget because so much budget is taken up with the current environment. I've already maxed out my budget. It doesn't leave me a lot of room to go out and buy new technology. So we believe, and based on the cost savings that we're seeing in the private sector, we believe that there's an opportunity if we move to a commercial first posture where we're challenging industry to solution, the cost savings, because we're going to attack the inefficiencies within the public sector, the cost saving prospects are in the billions of dollars. The other side of the equation is that when we limit spending on new IT, it almost borderlines on irresponsible. And I'll run through an example very quickly. I know I'm running out of time. But the government is currently using software and some platforms that are no longer supported by the private sector. There's nobody patching the security of this software or of these platforms. So the posture, if you limit spending on buying new IT, the risk that you're running in the back office because nobody's supporting the old IT is significant. So the security risk is heightened. And the reliance on trying to maximize the investments that you made in previous technology, when technology over the course of a few years was rapidly changing, that posture, relying on the older technology, holds the organization back from being able to provide the digital services to the citizens and consumers that we're supposed to be serving. And then lastly, of course, the security and privacy side of the equation. When we're not leveraging the latest technologies, the security posture and our ability to protect the data that we're collecting diminishes. Now, the other side of the argument that we get from a lot of public sector is vendor lock-in. When I choose a solution with one vendor, and that vendor, I'm reliant on that vendor to provide that service, they have a tendency to rake me over the coals. And I said, yes, that happens. So you create environments that aren't sole vendors. You go with a marketplace approach. Now, the marketplace approach, the easiest way I can explain this to you is like an app store. It's the same type of app store or play store that you have on your phone. You create a multi-vendor source list that allows government CIOs from different departments to pull down platforms and applications of their choosing based on, oftentimes, the training that their own staff has and the familiarity that their staff has with that product. There's some great examples of this. The easiest one that I can come up with is the UK. They have a G Cloud platform, and 90% of the contracts to develop applications on that cloud platform go to SMEs. Right? So they're really supporting the growth of UK-based SMEs because the SMEs are providing the applications. They've set the framework around the network and the infrastructure and the platform, and SMEs are allowed to innovate on that platform. So there's a real opportunity here to transform the way that we do business. And I think from the export position, from the job creation position, if we went with commercial first posture for IT, it would really change the environment.
All right, thank you, Andre. we'll discuss the efficiency of your presentation later, but Mr. Minister, you came from what we would argue the private sector is far more efficient than the government. Now you are the Treasury Board President for a behemoth of a government, billions of taxpayers' dollars. I know that the provincial government in Ontario has just embarked upon quite a significant transformation in procurement. So we look forward to you discussing that, and then we will have an open discussion. And thank you for those of you that have already submitted some questions. So, Mr. Minister, please, the floor is yours.
Sure. Thank you, Adrienne. And it's now you are watching the clock, right? So
I am.
10 minutes, and
I
I'm
am.
now a politician. And if you let me go, you may have to put your clocks back an hour again. And you don't want to do that. We just did that. So thank you. It's a real honor to be here at Preston Manning's conference. I've admired him for a number of years, and to actually be here for the first time is really a thrill. So I'm thankful to be here. A little bit about myself first. I got in politics. I've spent 30 years in the private sector, so didn't run for anything, including dog catcher. This is the first time I've been elected. And I'll tell you the reasons why. My parents are refugees from Hungary, and my mother's family came to Canada. My mother's best friend, her family escaped in the 44, and they went to Venezuela. So one family to Canada, one to Venezuela. And Venezuela had as good or better economy back then than Canada. And I'm so glad they chose Canada, because what a great country. And I've been blessed in my business career. Worked on Wall Street for 15 years and 15 years here in Canada. And you have an opportunity, when an opportunity presents itself, to kind of come back to give back to the country that was so great to my family. And the opportunities in social mobility to be able to sit in front of you as Minister of the Treasury Board, President of the Treasury Board. And by the way, that never gets old. So if you want to call me President, Mr. President, that's fine by me. Let me also explain. President of the Treasury Board, it sounds great, but what is it? I was thinking maybe it's a bit like a chief operating officer, but not really. It's really where all the spending decisions for program spending, for capital spending, and also all the risks come through Treasury Board. So a real great lens, so you get to see everything. And let me tell you, in government, what I've learned, and it's true, I worked at large organizations, TD and Manulife, for example, you get these silos. And you get silos in private sector, they exist, build up diversified businesses. Well, in government, you get in government, and these silos are in ministries are not only deep and strong, they are steel, concrete, reinforced silos. And they develop their capabilities in their own silos. So one of the great things about Treasury Board, and it's a central agency, it's called Treasury Board Secretariat, is that you can look across those ministries and across those silos horizontally and start to collaborate to get scale and efficiencies, and technology is the massive enabler to do that. I'll also say that I think Shannon mentioned culture. I think I asked your colleague, how many people does Amazon have? 700,000 employees globally. Well, I got you there. I got 800,000 employees in government. And so to actually change and move the culture in a direction that you folks are describing is not an insignificant task. And what is so critical when changing the culture to be collaborative, to look across ministries, to embrace change and technology, the tone from the top, the leadership has to really believe it. And I'm very thrilled and privileged that the Premier of Ontario has given me the keys and given our team the keys to actually execute that change. The cabinet buy into this. The ministries at the top of the house buy into it. So that's a critical part of being able to execute in a digital world. Let me tell you also my private sector experience. TD Bank, and this is maybe aging myself a little bit, when the banking system came up with the automated teller machines, the ATMs, everyone thought the tellers would be out of a job. It was just catastrophic. Research now shows that the ATM created 3 new jobs per branch. It took away the menial tasks and allowed, and it was more secure, by the way, but allowed those same tellers to be upgraded in their skill set and provide more value-added services and customer interactions. So, you know, this digital world, we talk a lot about the disruption that it might cause. I actually think this is an amazing opportunity to kind of experience what, just that example, change was very good for the banking system, and it really changed also the customer experience. You talked a little bit about the customer experience. My most recent job, we developed a platform to try to make everything digital interactively in the financial markets. And our goal was to reduce the cost. And by the way, digitizing transactions reduces costs dramatically. You touched upon it. And the customer experience is up here, because who wants to line up for this, that, or the other thing? Well, in government, guess what? We've got the model the other way. The customer experience is down here. The citizen for the people is down here, and the cost base is up here. So we got to change the model. Part of it comes from the structure of government, the silos that I talked about. But it's also a cultural thing about product. It's programs, getting money out the door. It's not about the citizen or what the customer wants or what the patient wants or what the people wants. So we've got to change the paradigm. Service Ontario is a great example. 30% of their transactions are online. But yet it's 57% cheaper doing that transaction online. That means we got to migrate a whole ton of people into a digital world, and that will improve the customer experience. Who wants to line up? I'm changing addresses. I got to go to the Service Ontario to change my healthcare and all that. You know, who wants to do that? Nobody. I'll quickly talk about two other massive things, and then we'll get into the Q&A. Our healthcare modernization, a big part of government, $62 billion is the spend, is about modernizing our delivery system for the patient, for the person, designed around there. And technology and digital is going to be a massive enabler. Andrea, you talked about using private sector apps, using the disruptive power of technology, bringing it in so that we can provide a better patient experience. It's a win-win, because the cost base goes down and the experience goes up. And maybe if I can, I'll do one more example. Our police service in my region in Durham, they showed me how it used to be all evidence collected at the crime scene was through taking video and burning it onto a DVD and taking it back to the station and all this stuff. And so I went to see them, and they said, well, Minister, do you know how hard it is to get a DVD player today? They don't sell them anymore. And everything is logged on these DVDs. It's labeled, and then it's shipped down to the Attorney General, and things get lost, they get mislabeled, they get damaged. It's not that secure. Well, now they do it all in the cloud. They digitize the whole thing. It's interactive back to headquarters, so the crime scene, there's a dialogue going real time. They can then say, well, take a shot of this, or do this, or have you done that? It's all secure. And then the administration, the labeling, the loss factor goes down, the damage factor goes down. They don't courier it down to the Attorney General. And it's all backed up on the cloud. And folks, it's way more secure than the old system. So government doesn't fear the cloud. In fact, the government embraces a lot of what you folks were talking about. And I asked, well, how many police forces in Ontario have digital technology for evidence collecting? Minister, we're the first. It's 2019. More secure, lower cost, frees up a massive amount of people at the division to not do administrative tasks, labeling, putting in files, etc., freeing up to do more value-added tasks for evidence and prosecution and so forth. So, Adrienne, am I under 10 minutes?
You're doing very well, Mr. Minister.
Okay, I'll stop there.
All right.
But I'm looking forward to the supplemental.
Thank you very much. Andre, of course, mentioned in Canada, our technology fields are growing, the hiring. I'm a little disappointed, Shannon, that we didn't get the Amazon headquarters here. Maybe you guys should revisit that, but that's not what I want to ask you. I want to ask
We
both
continue
you
to create lots of jobs here in Canada.
That's great. We appreciate that. I want to ask sort of when we think of as efficient as Amazon is. I can literally go on my phone right now, go on Amazon Prime, and I can have pretty much anything I want delivered to this hotel room by 9 o'clock tonight. That is obviously an unheard of concept in the very slow wheels of government. I want to get a sense from you about what it is like to deal with government, other than, you know, just they're inefficient, they're behemoth, et cetera. Your company is also very, very big. So what is it that you guys are doing to try to work with them to make it more efficient?
Yeah, well,
and save us money.
Sure. Well, you know, you may recall that I mentioned in my opening that governments are actually starting to really embrace cloud computing and commercial cloud computing in particular, and are really trying to figure out the right strategies and frameworks to put in place to adopt more cloud and shift to this model of paying for what they actually use, which drives down the cost. And one of the challenges that they have to deal with, in addition to the cultural issues, which the minister, I thought, did a great job of sort of explaining those with some wonderful examples, is they also have to update, governments have to update their procurement and acquisition processes and systems. So it's not just about the shift from capital expenditure to operational expenditure, it's also making sure you have the right procurement policies and frameworks in place to be able to move away from this sort of old way of doing things into the new way of doing things. And I would say that's probably the number one struggle that we have in terms of, you know, dealing with governments and sort of moving fast, is even if they want to move fast, they can't always move fast. And then sometimes when they do take a big leap, they even get criticized by, you know, others because of some of the cultural issues. Oh, we've always done it this way, so therefore what are you doing? And actually one interesting example of a provincial government taking a big leap after looking at this for several years and kind of updating their policies and frameworks in addition to what's going on in Ontario is at Quebec. They actually announced for the first time a cloud-first strategy and framework, and they're putting, you know, these more modern processes around that in procurement and acquisition, like the minister and the Ontario government are doing as well. And so we're seeing, I think, a really big, not just a desire to go to the cloud and to move to commercial solutions, but we're actually seeing some of these reforms happen here in Canada as well as around the world. In the U.S., you know, where I, of course, spend a fair amount of time, the push has been going on for several years at the federal level through consecutive administrations, so it's been a bipartisan effort. And we're seeing big pushes in the states too. I mentioned Latin America earlier. But again, some of the big challenges have to deal with, you know, making sure that there's modernization of the procurement systems.
We've had big challenges, though, in this country, in this province, when it's come to that notion of digitizing and going onto digital platforms. I'm specifically talking about the e-health fiasco over the last few years under previous government, and more recently at the federal level. You may not know about this, or not know as much, but the Phoenix Pay system.
Oh, I do.
And that's a number of the questions that are coming forward are with that in particular. So, Andre, maybe I'll have you start with that, and then I'll have you chime in as well, Mr. Minister. The resistance, perhaps, to change that culture and go to these digitizing mechanisms, because it does cost jobs as well, and governments have to deal with unions, and those are votes, and there's all sorts of considerations as well.
So two things there, and I think Shannon and the minister have both touched on these, is we need to change the way we're going about the business. The market has shifted, massive shift in the marketplace. Government's still trying to buy the same way they've always bought. Mm-hmm. So we talk a little bit about the shift from CapEx to OpEx, but it's also the manner in which you're going about procurement. And what we're recommending is shift to telling us what the problem is and telling us what outcome you want, and don't send us 600 specifications of what you think you want to build, because you can't possibly know that. This day and age, there's too much innovation, there's too much capacity in the market to be able to respond to that problem. Somebody might respond to it with artificial intelligence and running data analytics. Somebody else might come at the problem through blockchain. But you don't want to prescribe to an industry that provides this much innovation in which one of those solutions you think is best ahead of actually challenging the industry to be able to do that. I think the cultural issue really boils down to risk aversion. And nobody wants to see another Phoenix, So you end up in this framework where I trust the way I did it last time because I know I didn't make a mess of something that happened the last time I did this. So I go back to the tried and true method. And tried and true is actually what's kind of holding them back is I just repeat what I did 3 years ago or what I did 5 years ago. I cut and paste that in and off we go. It's a big shift. There's a lot of concern around jobs, but what our industry is saying is it's not about, we're automating these menial tasks like what the ATM did for tellers, is we think that automation will actually augment the value and the capacity of government employees to now enable them to provide digital services, as opposed to we're just going to get rid of a whole shift of them. It's not about taking the cost savings from adopting new technologies and cutting jobs. It's about augmenting that person's capability to drive digital services and to provide better services out to citizenry. And that's the exact same example that the banks are going through. And the banks have gone through this transition over the last few years. They were kind of one of the later adopters in terms of this digital transformation. And now they're starting to really see the benefits in terms of transaction costs.
Yeah, no, I'd love to weigh in. It's great. One of the things about my observation is that one benefit of being a laggard in Ontario, I'll speak about Ontario, is that the old biblical reference, the first shall be last and the last shall be first. Well, we've been last in this in some regards, and so I think we can do a lot of learning from others. Obviously, the Phoenix system, there's others. I've talked to the UK, I've talked to BC, I talked to even Jeb Bush when he was here. We talked about procurement. What do you talk about with Jeb Bush? You talk about procurement. But it gets me up in the morning. Because the why for us in Ontario, we have an imperative. We have a financial. This panel is going to cost us $1.4 million in interest payments. So I hope you're getting your money's worth, because we have so much debt and a $15 billion deficit. I do think project management skills also is very important, and the banks are no longer financial institutions. They're technology companies that deliver financial institutions. And having worked at a bank for almost 20 years and seeing the patchwork of legacy systems, and so there's a tremendous amount of knowledge and experience. To Andre's point, tap into the experience out there. Don't try to do things that others do extremely well. Learn from those experiences. It's all out there. I really believe it's a cultural and mindset. And if management, or in this case, the top of the house, the Premier and the Cabinet and all of us who were elected to deliver this, and I believe strongly because we have a strong business content in government. A lot of people like the Premier, who was a business guy, right? I mean, built a company in Canada and down in Chicago and New Jersey. You've got some of the dirt under your fingernails and some of the experience and scar tissue and learn from others so that you don't make the same mistakes. The government of Ontario makes some mistakes, I'm sure. But I also believe, like you hear in Silicon Valley, fail fast, fail often, do those sort of things.
Yeah, absolutely, please.
So this point that the minister made about failing fast, is critical, and it's something that we should be learning, a lot from. People are talking about Phoenix on the panel. Well, I think, some in the room may remember in the U.S. there was this thing called healthcare.gov that a few years ago got a lot of headlines, right? And not too many people were clapping there, but 750 million U.S. dollars were spent to build a system that didn't work. Wouldn't it have been nice to actually have the agility in your model? Okay, built into your model to be able to do the test and dev early on that would actually tell you early on that you're going to fail, and then you shift. People fail all the time. People in government should not be not willing to take risks. It's okay. It's okay to fail, but fail cheaply, fail quickly, and then move on. We do that in business all of the time. We shouldn't have these kind of failures anymore in government. And one of the reasons that we do is because of what we were talking about earlier about some of the resistance to change. And by the way, one thing I want to say here, and this is where I maybe get a little more controversial, at least with Andre, is I just have to give him a little bit of grief, is it's not just government making decisions that lead to some of these successes or not. It's also what we're doing in industry. The reality is that a number of us are trying to really push forward and support these major reforms within government to move forward IT modernization. But not everybody in the private sector is doing that. There are some in the private sector that still cling to the old way of, hey, let's actually have government continue to build their own data centers and do things the way they always did because we get fat margins and wow, that's really going to benefit our business model, over the next decade. We shouldn't tolerate that as citizens. If we really believe in lowering the costs of government and the size of government and making it more efficient, we should not tolerate that. And that's something I'm proud to say that my government, or my company, is very, very, very supportive of these reform processes. And sometimes we take a lot of hits for that, and we get targeted by a lot of the legacy players and defense contractors and folks like that, particularly in the US, as you might see through some of the headlines.
Andre, did you want to add anything to that?
Well, the concept of failing fast and making it okay to fail, the federal government's been talking about this for a few years. It's just, you have to create the environments and the mechanisms that enable the bureaucracy to set up projects that they're testing, they're experimenting, we're running proof of concepts and pilots and testing it out before we make the decision to buy.
But let me just interject for a moment. But why does it, when government has to fail, it costs us billions of dollars?
Because we're not failing.
They don't fail quickly. They fail slowly and very costly.
Very long, painful processes. Right. When I talk to industry, worst case scenario for a procurement cycle on a single sale, we've got some in government now that are at 5.5, 6 years. These should be cut down to 6 months. They should be able to challenge industry. When I appeared in front of Government Operations and Expenditures Committee, and I actually brought in the HQ2 proposal that the RFP that came out of Amazon. And I said, these guys are going to spend billions of dollars and hire 55,000 people, and the RFP is 8 pages long. Our government tries to buy Wi-Fi, which is the simplest technology, and the RFP is like 40 pages long, and I'm like, how do you come up with 40 pages of content? Instead of saying, we need Wi-Fi, we have this many installations, we'd like to have both public and private Wi-Fi, the private one's going to be password protected as is the public one. I don't know how we get to 40 pages. And it's because they're prescribing to the industry what and how they want it. And then they double down as they go down the pathway to say, no, we decided this is what we wanted at the outset. If you leave it as a problem and an outcome, you can shift, you can be agile and make those changes to that procurement process over time. But if you're prescriptive at the front end, it doesn't leave you any room. You're painting yourself into a corner.
It's been said that government is where good ideas go to die, and that happens far too often. But Mr. Minister, I want to dive a little bit into, what your government is doing, because we're seeing it at a municipal level where they're hiring chief technology officers, chief information officers, those that are working with those that do municipal procurement, specifically in the city of Toronto, for example, it's very big. They are working on modernization techniques. You meet with your fellow ministers across the country. Is this an issue at the table regularly? Is this individual provinces are trying to do their own thing? Is there any consistency?
Yeah, it's a great question. And yes, I've met with the federal president of the Treasury Board, but had to meet with the new one, and then I have to meet with the new one.
Yeah. There might be another one in a couple of weeks. So
may have a new one. Obviously in business, any board meeting or any business meeting environment, what could we do better? That's a critical part of it. What's our government doing? We commissioned a line-by-line review, and Ernst & Young did it for us. And within that, they highlighted some real transformational, modernized type buckets of work that we should do where we could really save the taxpayers significant dollars. 2 areas that's been touched on here, clearly digital. I mean, our digital strategy, everything's going to go digital. When I got to Treasury Board, the binders the paper and binders for the Treasury Board, and it's pretty voluminous, you could sprinkle snow on it and ski off of that. It was piled so high. So I said, we're going digital. No one can bring a piece of paper into Treasury Board. And guess what? The system is secure. It saved an army of people from having to put paper together with it's just a mindset thing. That didn't require, that wasn't Phoenix. All the security, online, et cetera, is all there. It changed the mindset. Same with the phones. I mean, we had landlines and cell phones, and so most of my staff asked me what a landline was. I was able to tell them because I was around when it was invented. So I was able to help them out a little there. But that's one area, digital. And then procurement, we've touched on it. We've seen other jurisdictions. You hear about the Titanics, fair enough, and you got to learn, you got to understand why. I have my own opinions and on Phoenix or whatever, but there are thousands and thousands that are very successful. And having some of the best practices that Shannon and Andre talked about allows you to avoid those Titanic ones and get all the wins. We in fact announced that we expect in our centralized procurement strategy, which technology is enabling us to do, to save $1 billion in taxpayer expenditures within 5 years. And we actually think that's fairly not only achievable but modest. So these are a couple of the big things that we're doing. And I'm very comfortable, having spent 30 years in the private sector, that we can, check with me in a few years, see if I'm still that enthusiastic. But I really do believe, because the tone from the top, we got very smart people in government, we got great leadership, and the culture change, people are buying into that. They want, and by the way, they don't think that they're losing their jobs. They're running to this. We did an online Planning for Prosperity survey to find out where are the good ideas from public sector. And we were hit with, I think, 23,000 submissions of ideas, and digital and procurement. They want to get on with it.
We have just 2 minutes left, so I want all three of you to address it, both of these notions. Personal security and data is a huge issue. The security of our own information becomes a big, big problem. But one of the things that we always like to talk about at Manning Center is, what can you do? So, Shannon?
Well, just on the security and privacy side, one of the big advantages of moving to commercial cloud are the security benefits, because the visibility you get, the control you get, and you're also automating your environments, and so you're taking out the people equation. A lot of the breaches that we've seen here in Canada and the US and other places over the last few years, a lot of that has involved, human error or exploitation of a human weak link. And so, governments are seeing that more and more, and are actually linking their IT modernization strategies with their cybersecurity strategies. As far as the second part of the question, this actually ties to what the minister was just saying, and I think it's a common theme in the panel, is we have to make sure that we're all doing our part to create a workforce for the 21st century. I mean, we are super proud of what we're doing here in Canada. We have 2 very advanced technology development centers in Toronto and in Vancouver, and we're going to continue to expand those. But we're also trying to do our part in terms of the training of workers who may be shifting from a data center management job or administrator job into more of a cloud-based job. And we've got a whole bunch of programs to do that. A lot of them, or most of them, are actually free, and we're also partnering a lot more with universities and technical schools everywhere we operate, including here in Canada. And we have to put skin in the game too to get a 21st century workforce.
Andre?
One of the things that we really haven't touched on is the fact that there's a lot of value in the data, but there might be a lot of hands touching the data. So having clear rules around who gets to have access, how we're securing the data, making sure that we're transparent with consumers and citizens about how we're collecting and why we're collecting and how we're going to leverage and use that data is going to be extremely important as we migrate into these new technologies. We have scenarios where public and private sector data are going to need to be integrated in real time for us to be able to leverage new technologies like connected and automated vehicles. So the manufacturer's data is going to have to speak to the city-based infrastructure data and into the Minister of Transportation. So we need to create the policies and the environments. We're looking at it now. So both Ontario recently announced a new data strategy. The federal government consulted on a data strategy last year. But that's going to be kind of that core component is, yes, privacy and security are components of having the right data strategy in place to be able to safely and securely protect the data, make sure that you've got accessibility management to make sure that only the right people get access to the data, but we've got to be able to start integrating private sector data and public sector data in massive amounts. That's where you're going to see the leverage, the potential for economic growth when we have these data sets that the AI can start running on is extreme.
Well, I gave the example of the police division where it's actually more secure, and that's pretty critical data. I went to my doctor in November, and she said, fax me your file from another institution. What the heck? Who's used a fax? And yet our health system really still relies on, and I don't think that's particularly secure. And I've seen it right at the front lines with the hospitals. When your life is threatened, et cetera, you want the data to be seamless. You want it protected for sure, but you want it, when it's your life, I think you want to make sure that the doctors, the nurses, the frontline people have access to the data. And it would shock you, I'm sure many would know, that you go from one department to another, they have to retake the blood, move the charts, et cetera. The error rates, for example, I'm using hospitals for privacy issues here, but you take a look at Humber River. They automated, digitized everything in the hospital. There is no paper. Their error rates went virtually to zero. Administering medicine, and it's full of data. And in fact, big data now they're using it for predictive power and in ways that we have never even envisaged. So I think that smart folks like our friends here will figure out how the data can be secure, but for the benefit of the people and the taxpayers.
All right, I want to thank all of you for your time and your presentations. I think it was valuable for everybody. Honorable Peter Bethlen-Falvey, Andre Leduc from ITAC, and Shannon Kellogg from Amazon. Thank you to all three of you.